I've been busy for the past month, and that's why the videos and blogs have been pretty erratic. And the project that I'm working on is a novel that really means a lot to me. And this novel is a prequel to the 2015 publication Spinsterella. Now, anyone who's read Spinsterella knows that this is a romance featuring an African American goth, and it shows a positive portrayal of the goth subculture. And with the prequel to Spinsterella, Spellbound, I'm trying to further present a positive image of goths and the goth subculture. When it comes down to the goth subculture, there are a lot of misconceptions, generalizations, and ideas that people have regarding it, especially those in the African American community. Many people think that goth in the black community is a white thing, and that's not true at all. Others believe that goth has something to do with worshiping the devil or other elements into the occult, and that's not true at all either. Goth has nothing to do with religion, it has nothing to do with the occult. These are people who enjoy the darker side of life and see things from a darker perspective. That's all really what goth is. And that has nothing to do with any sort of religion or occult or anything like that. And what people consider goth varies from person to person. And these are concepts I want to explore in the Spellbound novel. And the main reason why I'm writing this book is because I looked at most of the Gothic literature and I didn't see much young adult or teen fiction in the genre. And I wanted to write a book for what people would call the baby bats or the kids who were curious about the goth subculture. I wanted to write a story that would help, that they could relate to and identify with, and something that would present their experience to the world. Now, every goth has their own story about how they came into the subculture, and I wanted to show Matilda's journey into the goth subculture with the Spellbound project I'm working on right now. And I'm hoping people will relate to it and identify with it like they have with other characters I have written, like like Nikki Desmond or Easteam. And I wanted to write the story again, so because I believe that, like other art forms in literature, the Gothic literature genre needs to evolve. It needs to change, and it needs more titles in it so that other people can understand what the goth subculture is to this generation or even previous generations, because art and literature are constantly changing, because art and literature usually for the most part are a reflection or of a certain time period, and authors at the time for the most part are making a comment about things going on in that era. And that's why I believe the goth literature needs more contemporary titles in it, because while a lot of people like reading the classics, we really need stories that reflect the goth subculture today, especially for the younger readers, so that they can see that snapshot of what was going on at that time. And with Spinsterella, I was making a commentary about an older goth person today, but with Spellbound, I'm going back in time to 1989. Now, 1989 is a year I am well versed in. I grew up in black culture. During that time, it was what many people consider one of the great periods of hip hop. But there were other things going on in the African American culture that I want to explore, like the dark, because it was one of the darkest periods in New York history as well. When you look at New York in 1989, it was a very, very, very dark place. The crack epidemic was in full swing. We had crime at an all-time high. Um, Many of the buildings were abandoned and burnt out. There were a lot of abandoned lots. I mean, this was one of the darkest, again, darkest periods in New York City history. And I set the Spellbound story there because I wanted to contrast the difference between your Matilda, who has a bit of a darker aesthetic and is into horror movies and things like that, to what was really going on at the time. And in this story, I wanted to show how she enters the goth subculture because she's having issues with the African American mainstream culture, which is, as I saw it, at a bit of a crossroads because the African American community, for the most part, tries to follow one narrative for the most part, and they usually do whatever the mainstream says is the norm. And if you try to go outside of this norm, you are often met with resistance. And this is one of the reasons why the Matilda character enters the goth subculture because she's having a hard time finding that acceptance in the mainstream black culture. Now, a lot of people would question that, but this is something I've experienced myself dealing with African American culture. If you do not fit the narrative or follow the narrative, you run into a lot of bullying, a lot of attacks, and efforts to either make you conform or try to destroy you. And this is the big problem that a lot of people don't want to talk about in the African American community. And this is something I wanted to discuss in the novel, and I'm making commentary on because this is what a lot of black people who are on the fringe or on the outside have to deal with every day. And it's one of the reasons why Matilda enters the goth subculture, and what she runs into after that is more resistance from her family and other people, but it's about her discovering what she likes and what she enjoys, and eventually trying to get her family to understand that just because she has a dark or perspective on life doesn't mean that she's a bad person or that there's anything wrong with her. It just means that she sees the world in a different way. And that was another aspect of making me what motivates me to write this novel, because a lot of parents of goths think that there's something wrong with their child when in most cases there's nothing wrong at all. They just see the world differently from the rest of us, and that's not anything to be upset about. People having a different view of the world actually helps us because it gives us a better understanding of what's going on. Because sometimes when people approach things from a different perspective, they can give us an understanding of things that we didn't see or allow us to see the world from a way we didn't expect to see it from. Um, I'm at the first plot point on this Spellbound novel, and I'm hoping to have it finished by the end of the year. I hope the first draft, and maybe if I can get through the edits, I hope to have Spellbound on Amazon by 2017. I'm trying to keep the book kind of family friendly. It's kind of a challenge because um, teenagers curse a lot. It's just a part of life, and the book keeps falling into the R zone. But I really want this to be a positive book about the goth subculture, and I want to make it the best quality it can be. So I'm working hard to get it together so that it's just as good as the original Spinsterella. And I'm hoping, again, to really help people understand, especially the kids who want to enter the goth subculture and their parents, see that the goth subculture is nothing that they need to get upset about or get worried about, and that for the most part, most of the people in the goth subculture are some of the nicest, friendliest people you'll ever run into. You can pick up Spinsterella right now on Amazon.com in paperback and on Kindle. And I'm hoping again to have Spellbound out in 2017. And I'm hoping that both books will help people understand more about the goth subculture and the people of the goth subculture.